Some people are pretty graceful as life changes. People we know grow more distant, or we grow more distant from them. But if you have challenges with these experiences or know someone who does, consider this essay. It's my sincere hope that it might provide some help coping. I wanted to express the ideas from a teaching dream I had about a year ago now. I see relevance because of a lot of drama and dysfunction in people these days, when our paths in life no longer align well. This is often accompanied with charged emotions and high drama, but it need not be so. I'm aware that most people don't come to social media to think, and if you're not in a place to take this little journey, well, I'm confident that you will click away and move on. The rest of you are going to look back at that phrase at the end of this and laugh at the metaphor I just set out. My hope is to help some of those I've come to call friends in the last year or so. This happened because our paths aligned well on some topics, at least for a while. And while now some in that group are beginning to move on in a different direction, it does not need to involve the angst and sense of loss. So for anyone who thinks this essay may be of value, when some are moving on in life and others are not going along on the same ride, it is my sincere wish that these ideas may provide some help for you, or for someone you share this with because you believe it will help them. The images I want to share came to me in a dream. I'll talk about why this happens shortly, but the images were rich and deep and complex. Far more so than I can hope to convey without helping you understand the framework from which I experienced it. It was a typical omniscient viewpoint, common to many dreams, but it was also observed from a karmically detached state. I was aware in these images that emotions were highly charged, but I did not experience them, and this allowed me to realize that all these things would happen anyway. The highly charged emotions are natural, but they're not actually necessary. Of course, when there is death or injury or crime involved, emotions will be unavoidable. But with a different perspective, they may be processed more easily and integrated more gracefully along our paths. There are several complex pieces you need to understand to set this trip properly in motion. I need to build all the pieces in your minds before putting them together. But there is a problem with that. I cannot simply teleport my thinking into your brains. I cannot send the images to you telepathically, and without a common framework, it is not that I am unsure you picture my meaning. I am in fact sure that you do not. I would really like you to be able to grok these ideas. If you don't know that word, Google it. It's the only Martian word in the English dictionary. The simple truth is that none of us can seem to be able to really grok an idea, so I will do the best I can to build a proper image for the following pieces in your mind's eye. Ironic, really, since I have aphantasia, no way to visualize with my mind's eye. I literally have to remember and think about each of the pieces as I build a puzzle in my head. This is about dealing with things that change around us when we don't want them to. Associations and friendships that grow and change and move on. I've observed that some people might benefit from looking at these things from a different dimension. There are a number of pieces for this collage of ideas that I need to help you understand before I can set them together and put them into motion. So I need to build visualizations of teaching dreams in the first place. Multiple dimensions, both in mysticism and in science, of karma, of consciousness, of associations, both superficial and deep, and the many places that we are all at once, and the many directions we are going all at once. To express the ideas I want to convey, I want to make sure you grasp these elements in a way that permits this little journey to put those pieces together in your mind with, at least mostly, with the same meaning in which I intended them. Links to videos appropriate to all of these will be in the description of this video, and I know that leaves out people who browse with various apps on smart TVs. All I can offer is that if it's worth firing up the computer to dig more deeply into these ideas, please feel free to do so. The first area I'm going to cover is something that people often ask when they're in a life-stressing situation. Why are we here? I'm going to bring you to a fairly secular perspective. It's built into the framework of the universe. We can objectively measure it. But to get there, I'm going to take you through a traditional story. We all experience traumatic changes in our lives. We often reach deeply to try and touch some answer of why is this all happening. We know there may be no real answer, but here are my thoughts on the issue of meaning. I grew up attending a pre-evangelical Lutheran church. The pastor's son was a good friend, and while we've grown distant in most ways, I still deeply value the relationship from that part of my life. In the last year or so, however, I stumbled upon a revelatory idea, and I will share a link to this video that inspired this line of thinking. That video addresses the story of Adam and Eve in an entirely different way from the traditional Christian church. While it is deeply steeped in the traditions of a religious framework, it has deeply useful metaphorical meaning to even a completely secular view of our society. The rabbi who tells this version looks to understand the story from a perspective where many elements of the story, simplified for children, just don't make sense, and are given a more grown-up context in which the story takes on an entirely different meaning. I need to spoil it here, so if you want to watch the video without my summary, you better go there first. This is your last chance. The basic idea is that God wanted to send the idea of goodness to a place that had none. That everything he creates is good, and he cannot create something in that dark place because of its very nature. So he creates the garden, the tree of knowledge, and Adam, and Eve. And while I suggest listening to the story in its details and context, this is where I need to spoil the twist that he presents, because the twist is that God wanted them to eat from the tree of knowledge, for if they did not, they could not enter that dark world where he truly wanted them to go. It was Eve that figured it out, but the discovery they had figured it out brought sadness to God, for his creations would now know hardships. He was also pleased at the choice they made. It allowed them to bring the idea of goodness to that dark world that had none. In more secular terms, however, I see this as a metaphorical story that can give a valuable purpose to our place in society. They chose a path that brought them hardship. It was intended, but they could have chosen differently. You see, we know that with cooperation, we can reach beyond the bounds placed upon us by ignorance and fear, unproductive competition, greed, and avarice. Let God aside from this picture, these visionaries came to realize a better way to live, and set out to help others understand that, and turned from savagery to begin civilization. It need not be a creation myth so much as an origin myth. And so, a different dimension of the Christian creation story gives a deeper meaning to that story, and also answers the questions that don't make sense, like where the wives of Cain and Abel came from. How did a whole world of conflict arise from just their parents? It did not, for it was already there. Instead, they came into that world that already existed with the simple directive to make it a better place where God, meaning goodness, could be known. We waste so much effort and energy and emotions cultivated from fear, anger, and ignorance, and they hold us back from our personal potential. Over the last 15 years or so, I've heard many people tell me that if I am not angry, I must not be paying attention. Long ago I realized that if I am angry or frightened, I cannot pay attention. Why then do these people want me to be angry or afraid? One thing we do know and can measure is that built into the very fabric of the universe in some way we cannot now understand, working together in cooperation allows us to achieve far more than merely the sum of what is put collectively into any venture. We can measure this in clear and objective ways. That, of course, applies to both building and destroying. So before you allow something to be destroyed, make sure it is something you never want back. So why then are we here? To build, to learn, to make things better than they have been before. If you believe there is no God behind the scenes, then accept the nature of the universe itself, regardless of how it got this way. We achieve more working together. Give it a try. Consciousness and karma. One of the most useful suppositions about consciousness that I have become aware of is that of an emergent property from the interaction between intelligence and extelligence. That is to say, for us to become conscious, we must interact with other intelligent beings, and that they will also gain consciousness along the way. Feral people who have grown without interaction have a far more limited awareness of both self and others, but they will develop these things when they interact with other people. Now, let's step back to the Adam and Eve thing for just a few moments. Perhaps interaction with some other intelligence sparked consciousness, the creation of a new being. It could have simply been one of those states of mind in which the brain gives us a sense of connectedness with God. Perhaps that is also something built into the nature of the universe, to spark consciousness where it is possible. As for karma, I propose that something analogous to the idea of karma is something we create in interaction with ideas.
That is our karma.
You believe in karma?
Karma is a word, like love, a way of saying what I am here to do. I do not resent my karma. I am grateful for it.
A ritual, I learned, once visualized our bindings to people and ideas as cords of energy attaching to us, masses of karma that have grown from our attachments to ideas or people. To be more aware of self, this ritual suggests examining and acknowledging each of these ties and releasing them. That is not to say abandoning them, not abandoning friends, not abandoning family or ideas, but releasing the elements of that attachment that hold us back from the journeys we are on alone. It is a ritualistic form of introspection, providing a way to visualize how our attachments can affect us, and how we might find ways to continue on our own journey, while respecting how we got where we are. Friendships and associations. We have all manner of associations in our lives. People we know from work, people we work closely with, people who become friends. As we move along, some of these associations grow closer and others more distant. Couples once in love, where only one still is now. We do not always cope well with these changes, but as an adult it is likely that many of the friends from your childhood have grown distant because they are growing in different directions than you. All along the way, you develop new associations with different people. Some are close and others more distant. Some are brief and others persist. Sometimes it seems someone just isn't growing, and maybe they are indeed trapped by some kind of karma to some event or idea from their past. Their bodies continue to grow biologically, but their minds are trapped by something that they were not able to integrate into their life and adapt to. Usually some sort of a traumatic event that was deeply damaging in personal ways. They cannot find the trust in others with whom to share that they might find a path to release those binds. Often the way they have chosen to manage the injury has the unfortunate effect of preventing them from finding ways to move beyond it. And so their minds are trapped in an event from their youth while their body continues to grow and appears to others to house an adult. The release of these binds is often a different kind of trauma, but it is essential for them to grow past that point in their life. The resulting trauma is integrating all the years they have lost along the way. That can also be difficult to manage, and escape from both traumas is best shared with someone who has made the choice to help and support these changes. Be it a friend or a counselor, another person is an essential part of navigating these experiences and becoming a better person. There are also situations where the group can diminish the capacity of an individual associated with it. Examples of this include, most dramatically, agents infiltrating cults or criminal groups. Over time, the agent repeating the dogmas of that group can lose aspects of themselves to the thinking of the group. However, it also happens at the individual level. Interactions with narcissistic personality types is damaging to the self in many different ways, and some are life-challenging. It is generally not a good thing to try to force someone to change their path, unless that path is clearly and patently self-destructive and dangerous. If that's the case, then others associated with that person or group can and should get involved to provide support for the otherwise traumatic change. As with the laws of physics, inertia seems to apply to karma. An extraordinary individual might contribute to transforming others or even groups, but there is potential harm in trying to force anyone from the paths they are on, and we may not be aware of other factors that might contribute. Which brings me to the concept of other dimensions. This is the most technical and one of the most fundamental elements that I need you to grasp before putting the collage together and setting it into motion. Metaphysics and mysticism have adopted an understanding of dimensions that is akin to concepts from science fiction. Most of this stems from books that have been written over time. They're very popular, that try to tie science and math and mysticism, but they don't do it very well, and they actually do a great deal of conceptual harm along the way. Being popular is not necessarily either right or best. It draws a mistaken concept of dimensions from an attempt to visualize concepts from science and math, in which a dimension is really nothing more than an independent variable. We're used to expressing information on a two-dimensional surface, a screen or a piece of paper. We can imagine and false perspective to visualize a third dimension of depth in a kind of illusion of three-dimensional space. By allowing motion or a change over time, we can vaguely imagine a fourth dimension within that same kind of visualization. Normally we call that one time, but in math and science it can literally be any dimension. On the screen, x and y are orthogonal, as are all independent variables, 90 degrees to each other. Moving along one has no impact in our position on the other. We experience three dimensions in space, but in math and science there can be many more dimensions, all that are needed for all of the independent variables. When we begin to imagine depth to the surface of that screen, we twist other dimensions and project them down to the two on the surface, creating a warped sense of the reality we want to visualize. We cannot meaningfully project more than 4 dimensions in this way, and so we will often strive to preserve no changes in any other variables as we examine the 4 we have chosen. And even that visualization is a warped representation that simply ignores other influences. Perhaps it would be better to say in this situation that we are not aware of any other influences. We cannot perceive them from this perspective. Our ability to perceive complex situations is extremely limited, even if we're aware of the many facets of a situation that others are not aware of at all. When other people act in ways we question, there are certainly dimensions of their acts we cannot fathom for a broad variety of reasons. These reasons exist independently of those things we are aware of. They happen with little or no clear effect on those dimensions of the person we're conscious of. So it is also plausible that while we do not see their growth, they may in fact be growing in directions and dimensions of which we are not aware and cannot perceive. Life just isn't simple. The teaching dream. In a previous essay, I mentioned the teaching dream. This concept came to me also from the metaphysical and spiritual areas I explored. From a physiological standpoint, it's the brain creating new neural pathways in response to some recent event. Sometimes, but not necessarily traumatic, the event is literally transforming our brain with the new information. It is often just the side effect of learning. The result is often that we dream, but those dreams can be strange and seem completely unrelated to the subject we are integrating. The dreams are of things our brain is trained to compare and contrast to the new experience, and has more to do with a literal chemical search for relevance. Some people choose to look upon these as teaching dreams, especially when they seem relevant and meaningful to us. When we believe we have found a meaningful relation to the idea, chemicals in our brain make us feel good about it, reinforcing the idea regardless of whether it is right or wrong. In my first introductory video, I stated that friendships and alliances in the Bigfoot community shift like sands in the desert. That was after observing that community from the outside for over a year, while studying the previous 20 or more years of it. About a year ago, and about a year after that video, I had such a dream that today seems just so terribly relevant to a few people at this point in time. It will certainly be relevant to others at various points in the future. Now that all the pieces of this collage are ready, I'll try to assemble them and set them into motion for you. Just a couple more bits of paint to provide some details. I experienced this as a karmically detached, semi-lucid dream. That is to say, I was aware of strong emotions attached to some of these events, representations, but I was not connected to them from the perspective within that vision. I had some control over the perspective from which I could see the elements, but I did not have control over the elements themselves. In this semi-lucid vision, I was aware of what I would describe as rafts. They appeared to be afloat on a bay. I say that because there seemed to be hills beyond what may have been a shore, but I was far from the shore on my own raft, moving along with and between others. There were very few people alone on rafts, and they all seemed to be moving with some purpose, though that purpose was not known, even to me on my own raft. Other rafts had a few people. Let's call that the backyard barbecue, a close association of a few people with a fairly clear goal, typically. Some rafts were analogous to, say, a sports bar. Someone stepping in would often be barely noticed except by a handful of relevant contacts. People would come and go freely. Others were more analogous to an Irish pub. Stepping onto those, and the conversation stops, and all eyes fall upon the newcomer to assess if they're friend or other. People would still come and go from time to time, but the structure was different, and the bindings were greater between those present. To the center of all these rafts, people were largely oblivious to anything else. Yet, near the edge, the crowd would occasionally look at other rafts around them, wondering, curious. And here is where other dimensions come into play, because this was a far more deep and complex and rich presentation than I can even hope to describe to you. And as I thought about how all these related, the whole vision warped and shifted. I knew everything was exactly the same as it had been a moment before, but now there were people on the raft I stood upon, and some had just stepped onto another, while one or two stepped onto mine, and we moved along. Crossing paths with another, we might move together for a while, and then resume our different paths in different directions, perhaps with different people yet again. Once again the vision shifted, perspective changing without movement, and another aspect of lives around me came into view. all as it was a moment before, but viewed from a different dimension. I felt wonder and astonishment at this perspective, and can only bring a fragment of this idea to you in words. There were no emotional attachments from any of these perspectives. Everyone was on their own journey, and sometimes our paths would cross for a while, and other times we would move along on our own paths. I was aware at times that there were strong emotions in places, but not of their nature in any given case. The thought came to me that what happens at any moment and how we feel at that moment is independent of what we will do with the results in life. It is in those choices that we manage to move along in life. Each of these rafts in different dimensions in which they move can represent family, friends, classrooms, and workplaces. They can be police or firemen or paramedics called to an emergency, surgical teams or hospital care teams. They can be clubs or cliques or even criminal conspiracies. If one tries to hold something together beyond its useful purpose, someone, perhaps everyone, ends up drawn in dimensions that do not fit where they are in life. They can actually inflict harm to some of those involved. Clinging to an idea that has lost its relevance can affect someone across all the places they are and all the paths they are on, and usually not in good ways. One last flash of insight came as I was shown how every time our path crossed that of another was an association we could recall at any point in our journey. They were never truly undone, but they persisted in still other dimensions I couldn't quite grasp from even this perspective. Those in our lives now may be in different places tomorrow, or perhaps they were yesterday. These things will change, and it is a good thing for each of us along the way. Even the bad experiences along these paths can be given purpose and value. It is our place to learn what we can from those around us, and to respect the paths they are on alone. To step away from what is not working well, and to grow ourselves and those around us with these experiences. At any one time, each of us is in many different places and on many different paths. It is part of life to feel the good and the bad from all of these things. It is just part of life. Our greatest problems come from when life moves on, and we do not. I am the Curious Cryptid, and it is my sincere wish that these ideas may provide support to you or to a friend of yours who is dealing with these sorts of changes. It is most often that our burden is eased by the support and the different perspective of others. Whether there is a God or not, the goodness in our lives and the damages come mostly from those around us, and it is our choice to reflect that, to damage it ourselves, or to transform it into something better.